Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On December 18th, 2013, a young woman named Brianna Worlan was abruptly awakened by an unexpected phone call at 1:45 in the morning. She picked up the phone to find her best friend Heather on the other end, sobbing. Heather shared a recent conversation she had with Sydney, her ex-lover. Sydney had called her, revealing that he had split from his wife, expressing regret over their own breakup, and asking Heather to start over again. Brianna, curious, asked why Heather even answered his call. It turned out that the number was unknown, prompting Heather to pick up. After listening and slightly calming her friend down, Brianna insisted that Heather had only recently overcome the difficulties of their breakup and shouldn't get involved with Sydney again. She persuaded Heather to go back to sleep and rest, and they said their goodbyes. The picturesque Horry County in South Carolina is often considered an ideal place to live. This region is famous for its beautiful beaches, among which Myrtle Beach stands out for its beauty and popularity. Besides the beaches, one can enjoy dense forests, expansive rivers, and numerous friendly towns. On December 19th, local police in Horry County discovered an abandoned car, a green Dodge Intrepid, parked in a secluded and remote area along the Waccamaw River. The area, known as Peachtree Landing, was about 8 miles from Myrtle Beach. This spot was used as a dock for small boats and was at the end of a long, lesser-known road seldom traveled by cars. The police checked the car's registration in their system and found it was registered to Terry Elvis. Officers were dispatched to his residence. When they knocked on his door and informed him about the found car, Terry was at home watching TV on his living room sofa. It turned out that the car belonged to his daughter, Heather. Terry tried to contact Heather by phone, but she was unreachable. He agreed to accompany the police to Peachtree Landing to investigate further. Upon seeing his daughter's car in such a strange, secluded location, Terry was surprised but initially not overly worried about his daughter. He assumed that the car might have been stolen, as it was odd that it was there without its owner. After receiving a spare key from Terry, the police opened the car and thoroughly inspected it. They found no personal belongings in the cabin, including Heather's purse, keys, or mobile phone. Terry's concern grew, and he tried to contact Heather again. Still not receiving a response, he called the restaurant where she worked. The manager informed him that Heather hadn't shown up for work and was not scheduled until the next day. Realizing something was amiss, Terry informed the police of his concerns, stating that such behavior was completely out of character for his daughter and that something must have happened. At the time, the car and the riverbank where it was found were not considered a crime scene, as there were no signs of a struggle, broken glass, or blood. Nevertheless, authorities decided to launch a missing person investigation. Police and volunteers searched the land, while divers explored the riverbed. During the search, human remains were found in the forest, but they were identified as belonging to an unknown man, not the missing woman. Investigators, looking for any lead, examined the background of the missing woman. 20-year-old Heather was the daughter of Terry and Debbie Elvis, who lived in the county. She had a close relationship with her parents and younger sister. Heather's father noted that their family had always been united and supportive of each other. Although Heather was independent, she remained close to her father, communicating with him daily by phone. In 2011, after graduating from St. James High School, Heather announced to her family that she wanted to move in with her best friend, Brianna Worlan. Her parents fully supported this decision. At 20, Heather worked as a waitress at the Tilted Kilt, a Scottish-themed restaurant in Myrtle Beach, and aspired to become a cosmetologist. Her younger sister, Morgan, shared that Heather's passions included makeup, working in front of the camera, and she was known for her creativity and ambition. Heather was also popular in her town for her kind, carefree, and positive nature. Her friend Brianna noted that when people remember and talk about her, they smile because she was always a bright personality. Another friend described Heather as sociable, freedom-loving, and life-enjoying. She always sought to live life to the fullest. In 2013, Heather had been living for a year with her best friend Brianna in Myrtle Beach. She was doing well in her studies, and life seemed wonderful. However, everything changed when a chance encounter at the Tilted Kilt set Heather on a path leading to tragedy. On a warm June afternoon, Heather was working the day shift at a busy restaurant. While chatting with customers, taking orders, and carrying trays into the kitchen, she ran into 37-year-old Sydney Moorer, a father of 3 and a handyman. Sydney had a small kitchen appliance repair business in Myrtle Beach, and he had gotten an order from the restaurant that day. They struck up a conversation, and Heather felt an instant attraction to the man. From that day on, their interactions became more frequent. They found that they shared many of the same interests and hobbies. Heather even hinted at her feelings on Twitter, writing that she was attracted to older men. By the end of July, Heather began posting intimate messages addressed to Sydney, who was renovating her restaurant. She also talked about Sydney to her friends and co-workers, revealing that he was the same guy from her Twitter posts. Sydney liked Heather's attention and began showing up at the restaurant regularly. They often entertained in the kitchen while Sydney worked on appliance repairs. By July, their relationship had probably evolved from innocent flirting to something more serious, as evidenced by 2 tweets Heather posted within a minute of each other. In one tweet, she mentioned that she had done something, and in the other tweet she wrote that she was too deep to stop. Most of Heather's co-workers knew of her affection for 37-year-old Sydney and began gossiping about their affair. One co-worker later admitted that everyone knew about their relationship and disapproved of it because Sydney was a married man. Moreover, they often called Heather different names and once decided to play a joke on her. 2 colleagues called the restaurant, pretending to be Tammy, Sydney's wife. In August, the rumors were finally confirmed. Sydney began to appear more often in the restaurant, constantly brought Heather coffee and sweets, sat in the dining area, or waited for her at the back door after her shift so they could leave together. The couple often shared details of their relationship with friends, and Sydney went so far as to tell acquaintances about his plans to hire Heather as a full-time nanny when he and his wife moved to Florida. Heather also told her friends about Sydney's plans, and everyone thought it was weird. The lovers were constantly on the phone and often traveled to remote and secluded places in their cars for close calls. It was obvious that this relationship was toxic to Heather. Sydney constantly assured her that he was tired, dissatisfied with his wife, and wanted to leave her, but apparently these were only empty promises. All of Heather's friends warned her that Sydney was just using her. By mid-September, Heather seemed to realize the situation she was in. On September 21st, she tweeted, "Once an angel and a demon fell in love, but it didn't lead to a good outcome." Perhaps that was the day she tried to break her strange bond with Sydney. The decisive moment came when 34-year-old Tammy, Sydney's wife of 34 years, finally found out about her husband's secret affair. She called Heather and began humiliating her over the phone. Brianna, Heather's roommate, witnessed the conversation and later told investigators that Heather endured the insults for a long time. At one point, Tammy claimed that Sydney was only using Heather for his fantasies, and even had Sydney tell her personally over the phone. Sydney echoed his wife's words, telling Heather that she means nothing to him and is an easy target. Naturally, this emotionally shook the girl. Sydney and Tammy made her feel terrible and practically destroyed her identity. Prosecutor Chris Helms later determined that Tammy had been in a commanding position in the Moorer household, dictating where and when Sydney should work and controlling all of his actions. Helms also noted that Tammy was furious at the betrayal and could not forgive Sydney and Heather, so she decided to ruin the young woman's life. After the truth was revealed, Tammy began handcuffing Sydney and tying him to the bed at night so he couldn't leave while she slept. She also changed the password on his phone and made him get a tattoo of her name on his stomach. Sydney agreed to all of this in hopes of saving his marriage and family. According to Brianna, Tammy's attacks did not stop at phone calls, but escalated into systematic acts of hate. Tammy began making constant phone calls to Heather's work, demanding that she be fired. She continued to call Heather from Sydney's phone and send pictures and videos of the 2 of them together, including during intimate encounters. Heather wrote Sydney a letter begging him to get Tammy to stop this harassment as it was causing problems at her job. Saddened and upset by the way the man she loved had treated her, Heather did everything she could to get her life back on track, even starting to attend church with her best friend. In early November, Tammy sent Heather new threatening messages, demanding that Heather give her her address. Tammy warned that if Heather did not comply, she would find her anyway, and the consequences would be severe. Tammy also stated that she had been watching Sydney since January 2012 and that Heather could no longer influence him. By this point, Heather was completely exhausted both physically and emotionally and couldn't understand why Tammy wouldn't leave her alone, especially since her relationship with Sydney was long over and she wanted to forget everything that had happened. Heather told her friend that Tammy seemed to be obsessed with her. By the end of November, more than 2 weeks after receiving Tammy's threatening messages, things finally began to calm down. Sydney and Tammy left for a 3-day trip to California with their 3 children in their new Ford F-150 SUV. With the Moorer family out of town, Heather was finally able to relax and enjoy the moment, temporarily free from Tammy's threats. Heather also had a joyous event in her life. She was able to get her dream job at a beauty salon as a makeup artist. She was scheduled to start work before Christmas. Heather was thrilled and happily shared the news with all her friends and family. However, fears began to surface in her life that could only exacerbate her problems with Tammy. In early November, Heather and her co-workers at Tilted Kilt noticed that she had suddenly gained weight in a very short period of time. Heather became concerned and worried that she might be pregnant with Sydney's baby. Upset and scared, she decided to take a pregnancy test at the restaurant. Her manager, Jessica Cook, later told police that Heather was desperate about the whole situation and was afraid that Tammy might do something terrible to her. However, the test turned out to be faulty, and at that point, Heather never found out whether or not she was pregnant with Sydney's child. Heather's best friend also mentioned that when she took a pregnancy test at work in early November, Heather had not been intimate with anyone other than Sydney. Despite worrying about a possible pregnancy in the winter of 2013, Heather was always optimistic. She decided it was time to move forward and make a fresh start. She hoped for a new, happier, and healthier relationship and agreed to go on a first date with Steve Gerald, a man she had known briefly but was genuinely attracted to. On the evening of December 17th, Heather and Steve met around 10 p.m. and decided to drive around Myrtle Beach to admire the Christmas lights. A little later, they decided to stop at a nearby parking lot where Steve taught Heather how to drive his manual transmission car. Excited, Heather sent her father a picture of herself behind the wheel of the car with the words, "I just learned to drive like a true professional." Steve later said they arranged a second date, and he dropped Heather off at her Carolina Forest apartment around 1:15 a.m. Detectives had a hard time finding specific clues or leads, so they decided to put together a timeline of events that occurred before Heather's disappearance on December 17th and 18. The prime suspect was Steve Gerald, with whom Heather had spent the evening before her disappearance. However, after questioning, no evidence of his involvement was found, and suspicions against him were dropped. Heather's family and friends were surprised that while they were doing their best to find the girl, reaching out to the public and offering a reward for information about her whereabouts, Tammy Moorer, at the same time, became active on social media, continuing to insult Heather. This sparked outrage and drew the attention of investigators leading the investigation. On December 20th, after Brianna and her colleagues at the restaurant told police about the affair between Sydney and Heather, detectives called Sydney in for questioning. Throughout the interrogation, Sydney was evasive and reserved, claiming that he was not near Peachtree Landing on the night of December 17th, 18. He also claimed that he had no contact with Heather and was on a trip with his wife Tammy at the time. Detectives believed he was lying, but they needed proof. That's when investigators turned their attention to Heather's call history and phone records, and they were finally able to find the first clues. By reconstructing Heather's movements on the day of her disappearance, they tried to determine Sydney's connection to these events. According to Brianna, on December 18th, Heather received a call from an unknown number, a call that lasted only 5 minutes. After that, Heather repeatedly tried to call the number back. Starting at 1:35 a.m., she attempted to dial the number a total of 9 times, indicating her insistence on talking to someone she knew. Police were able to pinpoint the exact location where the call was made from. It was a payphone near a gas station in Myrtle Beach. Surveillance footage confirmed that an unknown male was entering the phone booth at the time Heather received the call. All of this evidence was presented to Sydney, who initially denied making the call, but later admitted that he called Heather to ask her to leave him alone. Tammy Moorer was also called in for questioning where she spoke about her marriage and the situation, but denied any involvement in Heather's disappearance. She also stated that Heather had led an inappropriate lifestyle and called her behavior abnormal. Tammy argued that the problem was not just infidelity, but Heather's behavior in general. Based on these suspicions, detectives decided to check all the security cameras in the neighborhood and quickly uncovered evidence. Shortly before Heather's call, Sydney was captured on video buying a pregnancy test at a local supermarket. When asked who the test was for, the man said it was for his wife. Even more compelling evidence, discovered later, was footage from cameras installed along an isolated stretch of road leading to Peachtree Landing. These tapes showed a Ford F-150, very similar to Sydney's vehicle, driving toward the location where Heather's car was found at 3:36 a.m. and then leaving the area about 10 minutes later. Experts later confirmed that the SUV captured on the footage was indeed Sydney's. He was the last person Heather spoke to, and according to investigators, the last person to see her at Peachtree Landing. Using Heather's phone records, investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline of her recent movements. At 2:30 a.m., Heather's phone attempted to call the payphone number Sydney was using, but there was no answer. She then headed to Longbeard's Bar and Grill in Carolina Forest, not far from her apartment. She stayed there for about 15 minutes, and then headed toward Augusta Plantation Drive. She then returned to Longbeard's and stayed there for another 15 minutes. Heather tried calling Sydney again, but got no answer, and then went to her apartment, where she stayed for 5 minutes. At 3:25 a.m., Sydney's phone received another call, which he answered, and they talked for 4 minutes. At 3:37 a.m., Heather's phone was at Peachtree Landing, from where she made 3 attempts to call Sydney, but all went unanswered. The last attempt to call Sydney was made at 3:41, and by 3:42 the phone was disconnected. Security footage of Sydney's vehicle became incriminating evidence. However, even more compromising evidence was discovered in a search of the Moorers' home conducted after investigators obtained a warrant. Suspiciously, the Moorers got rid of their home video surveillance system on December 20th and installed a new one the next day. Although investigators were unable to access footage from the previous system, they seized recordings from the new one. The footage shows Sydney and Tammy Moorer thoroughly wiping down the interior of their car and then burning the rags they used to clean it, all on the day the new surveillance system was installed. In 2014, months after Heather Elvis disappeared, police achieved a breakthrough in the case. On February 21st of that year, it was announced that Sydney and Tammy Moorer had been arrested on charges of kidnapping Heather. They were later charged with murder as well, even though Heather's body was never found. However, while in jail, the Moorers refused to give any testimony. The police continued to search for Heather's body because without it, they did not have enough evidence to bring the felony charges to trial. Eventually, the murder charges were dropped, but the kidnapping charge remained. Heather's mother, Debbie, was disappointed that the charges were dropped, but felt relieved that she would not have to attend the trial and hear the details of what may have happened to her daughter. Heather's family hoped it would encourage potential witnesses to testify. Ultimately, Sydney Moorer's 5 months in custody were not the end of it. In 2017, he was found guilty of obstructing justice and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Following this, Sydney and Tammy were to stand trial for the kidnapping of Heather Elvis. The case generated immense public interest and received widespread media coverage. In 2019, 6 years after Heather's disappearance, several lengthy court hearings took place, where numerous witness testimonies, evidence, and proof of the couple's involvement in the crime were presented. After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury made their decision and justice was served. Sydney and Tammy Moorer were found guilty of kidnapping Heather Elvis. The court sentenced the Moorers to 30 years of imprisonment each for their crime and the associated conspiracy. Both husband and wife will serve their terms concurrently. Following the verdict, Sydney requested to speak in the courtroom. Despite the conviction, he desperately continued to assert his innocence. He addressed Heather's parents with understanding and sympathy, stating that their daughter was a wonderful girl and he regretted the tragedy that befell her, being a father himself. He acknowledged that he couldn't undo what had happened between him and Heather, but nothing could change now. Heather's parents gave an interview after the trial, which was extremely difficult for them. They expressed hope that this wouldn't be the end, and believed that someday Sydney and Tammy would reveal the truth about the crime. They described their daughter as a bright and sincere girl who suffered at the hands of the deceitful and cruel Moorers. On Heather's birthday, her loved ones organized a campaign at the public park where her car was found. Residents of the area brought flowers and donations to the memorial site. The funds raised were directed to a center for missing persons as a tribute to Heather and a way to support her family in their quest to find their daughter and learn the truth. To this day, Heather Elvis's body remains unfound. Her family continues to post missing person announcements every year on her birthday, hoping to attract attention and keep her memory, as well as that of others who have vanished alive. Debbie, Heather's mother, stated she could not find peace until she learns what happened to her daughter. She still hopes that her persistence will help uncover the truth, and that someday someone will tell them what really happened to Heather. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel and also don't forget to click the bell. There are many shocking stories ahead.